Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm your host, Susan Lindner of the Innovation Storytellers Show, where we seek to tell the stories behind the innovations and how innovations make their way to the finish line. We're not just talking about products and services, we're talking about the stories and the way that we communicate in order to get those big ideas done. And sometimes that takes an international lens. And I'm really excited today that my guest is joining me from the Netherlands. Maarten van Kroonenburg. He is the visionary behind BW Ventures. And if you're not familiar with it, well, we're going to talk about it today. As CEO, he's on a mission to revolutionize small businesses, crafting resilient and scalable models. He's drawing from his entrepreneurial journey, and Maarten leads with a blend of both strategic acumen and practical wisdom. At BW Ventures, he champions structured, customer-centric approaches to innovation and empowering companies to navigate future challenges with confidence. With Maarten at the helm, innovation meets pragmatism, driving success through informed decisions and enduring strategies. So, Maarten, welcome to the show. I'm very happy to have you here today.
Thanks a lot. What an intro. Thanks. I couldn't have described that better, to be honest.
Well, sometimes I'm an anthropologist, so taking approach from different countries is really important to me. And the way that we tell stories about how our big ideas make it or don't is important because almost everyone who's listening on to this show certainly has to work at a global level. We work in these relationships where we need to communicate across cultures, across scalable models, across MVPs, across politics, right? And so getting the story straight is so important. So first, tell us a little bit tell us a little bit about your entity and VW Ventures.
Yeah, and talking about stories, maybe I should go back a little bit further than just BW Ventures. So at the age of 19, I was making electronic music, dubstep and drum and bass in that stage. And probably you haven't listened to that a lot, but it's kind of big in the US right now. And I got a
Oh, I'm
contract.
familiar. I'm
You are
familiar.
familiar. Well, that's good.
What
That's
you
good.
what you wouldn't know about me is that in 1989, I was a hip hop DJ, but that was before
Whoa.
your time. Yeah. Okay.
That,
We
well,
see
so
each
I,
other. It's good.
yeah, it's good. That's very good. Oh, I'm impressed actually. I didn't know that, and it's kind of fun to know.
There
Anyway,
you
I
go.
was a DJ as well, and I produced the electronic music, and I got a contract from one of the bigger publishers in the Netherlands, and well, there were some clauses in the contract that I really didn't want to sign because what it basically said is every single thing, all my intellectual property in music was going to be theirs for the rest of my life. And at the age of 19, I was reading it on my own, the contract, and I thought, I'm never going to sign this. And the discussions got quite heated. And at one moment, I basically said, hey, I'm out of here. I'm going to do this myself. And I literally walked out of the room. And the next day, I went to the Chamber of Commerce because in the Netherlands, it's common to do that. And I started my first company. And in a few years, I basically created a few record labels, a booking agency, a pretty prestigious blog to grow all these specific activities, and I still release my own music. And it always feels a kind of weird step to explain this before you really get into innovation and what we do right now. But back then, Spotify was very, very small, especially in our musical niche. So we were still used to getting paid 99 cents per sold song, and that was a model in itself. But then we saw Spotify growing and at a like 3x every week with the amount of artists that they were getting onto Spotify. And probably everyone knows right now, but you do not get a lot of, well, payments from the streams that you actually achieve. So it's like 0.007, something like that per stream. So the whole business model was changing and I had to act. So I didn't have time to write a lot of plans, but I needed to come up with new business models for the fans that could also still fuel what we wanted to do and make a living out of it. And that's why I started to learn more about lean startup, customer development, design thinking, all these methodologies and maybe even paradigms, right? And I created a thesis about that, which got me a lot of prizes, etc. But then people started to mention to me, hey, what you have written and the model that you've created is actually way more interesting and more people could make use of that than what you're doing in the music industry itself and with that first business. And that got me thinking into maybe I should stop doing that and try something with the model that I've created. And that is basically the basis of what we did with PW Ventures. So that's about 8 years ago. I started PW Ventures with one vision because I saw that even though lean startup was there and even though customer development is there, I still see a lot of companies struggling with getting their product to market in a commercially successful way. Meaning, yes, we know how to create a great product. Yes, you know how to create a great marketing campaign or build a good team. However, they lack a proper sequence to do all these activities in the right order. And by
Mm.
not doing that in the right order, you probably spend a lot on product development, for example, or not on a lot on marketing campaigns or building a great sales team, but you get that sort of unbalanced growing pattern, and that is in the end going to, well, kill the project. And we have a structure in place that grows all these things in a proper balance.
And that it's so funny because my guest yesterday was the head of the accelerator program at University of Southern California, and he
Mm-hmm.
just wrote a book on timing and timing the market and trying to understand what are the critical pieces that align in order for you to have a successful launch of a product. But what I'm also hearing is sequencing really matters. It's not just about the date on the calendar necessarily and all the other foundational elements, but the order in which you do things. So, have you developed this kind of order of operations that innovation leaders should be thinking about?
Yeah, we actually have. And I think in general it's three big phases, but every big phase has a lot of sort of subsequences in there. But in
Mm.
general, the program that we call pre-acceleration is everything that you do before pre-accelerating, basically. And in our opinion, that means that you need to have a customer that you understand what you can, that's funny, what you can actually solve for them, why it's going to be different compared to all the existing alternatives. Then you're going to prototype your first value proposition, so not your first product yet. Then pitch the value proposition to the customer group that you figured out. And there is the key for me because you should already get signed contracts or at least signed LOIs before you continue. So that is going to help you create a good business case with actual prices in there that people are willing to sign up for. And that is especially in corporate innovation is going to help you to convince your board because they see that it is a business case with validated lines in your business case instead of creating a great Excel and seeing, where you can go to. And then after that, you can start the regular acceleration process, like building your MVP and building a first marketing and sales pipeline, growing the team and building a successful operations. I saw that
So,
you wanted to ask a question. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So let's talk about this a little bit. So, this basic foundation, as you see it, this is in the ideation stage.
Yeah, it's basically in the ideation stage. And I don't really talk a lot about ideation because, and I might sound a little bit contrarian compared to others here, but in my opinion, ideation shouldn't be a very long phase because the longer you think about the idea, the more you fall in love with the actual idea. And in my opinion, it makes a lot more sense to have that first idea and just write it down in 20 minutes and then start to figure out what the actual problems and needs there are underlying that idea. So what is it that the customer wants to get solved and what are the needs surrounding that? And if you do that very, very properly, you should have a very good understanding of what is the main problem that they are thinking of, right? All day long. And how does that divide in like 3 to 5 sub-problems? And there's typically a sort of cause and effect relationship between these two.
Mm.
Then, because that's still only 5% of the like a potential buying decision later on, but because this is just a rational case. But if you understand that, you can zoom in on the emotional side of that. So why is it frustrating, and what does it do to you as a person because you can't reach the goal? And that is almost 95% of making the decision to actually buy or use the product or service later on. And yeah, that's where I think the magic really, really happens, instead of just thinking and ideating about what we could potentially do.
So that ideation phase using design thinking concepts and I like to talk about empathy mapping. I
Yep.
love, as an anthropologist, I love ethnographic inquiry and doing interviews with potential target markets, all of that to validate and dig deeper into the idea. So once we pass through that first ideation stage and now we're building our MVP, what do you help entrepreneurs and larger businesses think about?
Yeah, so first things first, we will not really help build the product itself, because we believe that most of the customers that we help actually have big development teams or teams, engineering teams that can actually build the product. But what we do see is that in most of the companies that we go to, after you validated the case, there's a sort of, the board starts to pressure you on getting it out there and getting your first sales results. And what they tend to do as a solution is put account managers or account executives that already sell, well, products that have already been proven for the company. And they just say, hey, start selling that, please, because you know how to do sales. So you probably know how to sell this new proposition as well. And I think that is where we step in, because in our opinion, that's quite a big mistake, because selling a new value proposition means that you start from scratch. There is no sales playbook. There is no sales script. Everything has to be figured out from scratch again. And that is a completely different skill set than being an account executive and getting to closing a deal. Because here you need way more, learning, listening, analyzing what is actually happening. You still need to close a deal, but the way to closing the deal is completely different. And we basically help them to then come up with the new sales playbook with every step in there, right? With all the objections that you need to cover, and changing the model that you validated to, and because sometimes it needs change, right? Before you can actually scale it up in sales. But we bring it to that phase in which you can start scaling your sales team, because you've got a replicable process, and the account executives and the SDRs can step in and actually execute on that model.
Got you. And so thinking about selling in a whole different way is part of this process of what most innovation teams are dying for, which is creating value.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, and then this last piece about timing, right? Or about getting the pieces in place in the right order. Help
Mhm.
us with this last piece. What is your advice on, so you've built the thing, you've identified the right people to sell it. What are we missing? What's this last order of operations that we should be thinking about?
From getting validated to the right processes, after that, you also need to start scaling what you have actually found. And scaling can be done organically and inorganically, in my opinion, also with a new proposition. And that sort of, well, scaling or growth phase, what I see in practice is that the team is growing and everyone within the team starts to create their own little mini processes, and they start to deviate from what has actually been validated. And especially when you want to reach a level of sales, or a level that you can actually start, well, getting the returns back on all the investments that you made, you don't need to deviate in all sort of smaller little processes. And for us, it's crucial that once you start scaling, you train the team on actually doing exactly the same things that you have validated there. And about 20% of what you have proven can be optimized using new experiments. And that sort of exploiting and exploration balance, that's what we keep in check in growth. And if you want to
So
do
give
that,
us an example, Martin, so we can really make this real. Can you tell
yeah,
us about a product or a company that you were working with where you did this?
yeah, definitely. I think the best example is Fellow, which is basically a proposition that helps caregivers that also work for a company. So they are taking care of their family, and it is a very, very big problem in the Netherlands. So about
You mean elder
20,
care? Is that what we're talking about when you say taking care of the family?
it can be actually anyone that has become ill within your family. And in Dutch, there is a very proper word to this because it's something weird, but it's not commonly known in English, this word. It's caregiving for family, which basically means your parents, but it could also be your partner that became ill for a reason. And
Or a sick child, right? I mean, kids
yeah,
get
or
sick.
your Charles, exactly. And what we see is that these people need to give care for more than 8 hours next to their work. And it's funny because I think I can describe all the phases very practically here. When I came to this company, the mother company, which is a very big insurance company, they basically said, "Hey, we've got this value proposition. We bought a shared agenda with the goal of helping these caregivers share the care with others, basically. But
Mhm.
we are not able to make money out of it. The business model is not working. We've got over 60,000 free users, but that's it. We can't convert them into anything." So what we did is we first went back to the drawing board in what you just called sort of ideation, right? But we first dove into what are the actual problems that these caregivers are experiencing, and did all that process. And what we figured out is that within one experiment, we noticed that a caregiver that really has a lot of problem balancing their work and life and then giving care to someone else always had to do this on their own
Mm,
because no one in the family wanted to help. They just didn't want to spend that amount of time on taking care for someone. Typically, it was most often women that were taking care of the family. So, and the women were also taking care of the children. So there was a very big mess there. And
yeah. In America,
then,
we call this the sandwich generation. So,
yeah,
that's typically the mom is in the middle between caring for her parents and her children at the same time, and she's getting squeezed like a piece of cheese in the middle.
exactly. And most often they're the children of the baby boomer generation. And we're talking about the same generation. And
Yep.
if you notice or you look at this, it does make sense that you can't earn money with a shared agenda for caregivers if the only thing that they do is do it on their own because there's no one else actually helping them. So the shared agenda doesn't make sense. So we dove in more and more, and the Netherlands has quite a good health insurance or health system, healthcare system. However, it is very bureaucratic. So there is a lot that can help you out, but to get to all these regulations, it's quite hard and difficult. So what we started to do is we started to create a service that was helping someone taking care of others by at least doing all the paperwork, all the bureaucratic stuff. And at first, we wanted to do that for one caregiver, and let the caregiver pay for these services. But then we figured that politically this is very weird because people were used to the fact that all their caregiving activities were being sort of paid by insurances or the government. It's something that we have in the Netherlands. But in reality, that's the case. That's not the case anymore. So we started to look at the ecosystem, and this is where we started scaling, right? Because at first we knew that people were willing to pay for this, but once you start scaling, you get into not your early evangelist, but also the early majority. And the early majority was not, they didn't want to pay directly for the service itself. They wanted to use the
Mm.
service, but not pay for it. So we started to look in the ecosystem who also experiences problems of, the problems that the caregivers were experiencing. And we figured that most of the employers we're having 20% of what's that called? If you call in sick and there's the percentage that you call as I'm
Yeah, we call this, well, it's our paid time off, our PTO, as we call it.
and what we figured is that 18% of that was caregiving related.
Oh God.
And that
Awful.
is, yeah, that is quite a lot. And even with burnouts, we saw that about 10 to 15% of that was caregiving related. So we
Mm,
started to create a model for employers that they can basically pay a monthly fee to make sure that someone, if someone got to into a caregiving relationship, or they needed to give care to someone else, that they immediately could get the help from fellow. And that made us, see, hey, this is how we can scale into employers and also employer benefit programs. But then we needed to change the sales story because you're selling to companies instead of an individual. You still needed to sell it to the individual once they needed it, because no, they didn't have to pay it, but you still had to tell the right stories to convince them to actually use it. And then once we started scaling, we figured that if you do not have the proper story in place there and could repeat that every single time, you lost about 95% of the offers that you were creating. And why was that the case? Because an employer would still, it was something completely different compared to what they were used to. They were not used to actually paying for taking care of the parents of the one that is working for them. And that, you had to really create a story that resonated in a proper way. And if
mm,
you started deviating from that story, and the new salespeople that we brought in were actually doing that, they were not selling at all. So that's where we came back in, structured the process, and really trained the people, like, this is what you need to say and explain, etc., to get towards the proper sales. And then afterwards, facilitate and help a lot of these caregivers.
mm.
That full process took about 3 years, and they went from basically nothing to, well, they're into, I guess, 1 to 2 million euros in revenues right now per year, and they've helped, I think, over 20,000 caregivers. So that's actually, for the Netherlands, it's scaling quite rapidly right now.
Yeah. And congratulations. This process though, as I hear you talking about it, it's reconceptualizing the business model around caregiving. And
Yep.
by the way, we're experimenting with a lot of these models in the United States right now. For example, there is a program through our Medicaid, which is for our lowest income folks here
Hmm.
in the United States who get full health care, that rather than paying a home health aide, which is a third party, that rather select and you could select a family member to be a caregiver, and
Hmm.
that person would receive the same benefits as a home health worker because they're effectively doing that job, which has given some people the opportunity to actually quit their full-time jobs in order to properly care for their aging parent or
Hmm.
sick child, while receiving the benefits that would normally go to a stranger. And this way, a family member is compensated, is actually paid to do the work of an outsourced caregiver. And so that program it's beyond pilot stage, it's scaling all over the United States now. So that's another model that we're trying here. But, there are cries of potential fraud and family members just milking the system and perfectly healthy people using this system, this
Yep.
process. And
Well,
so, as always, right, there are always going to be these questions.
yeah, and that's quite interesting, because what you just mentioned has been implemented in the Netherlands, I think, over 40 years ago. And the result is now it's a super bureaucratic system, and basically
Ah,
nobody gets in. So how are you going to help them to make the right decisions and to balance, right, basically, should you have that budget and the benefits, and then stop doing work, or what is it that we can do within all these different rules?
fascinating. Okay,
It
so
is.
I should know better. Of course, the Netherlands is going to have already tried this out ahead of time. Um,
Well,
and what we have to look forward to, right? Where the safeguards that the US system might be able to impose. So, you know, The way that you approach it, though, I'm curious, the story that needed to be told to get people to think differently about it. What do you think is the most effective part of the story that was told that got people to go, oh, I get it. We have to do this differently?
I think the most important part is that if you tell stories about people that were actually giving care to a family member, and you told that particular story with all the ups and downs in it, people started to really relate to, hey, but it makes a difference. If we can at least give them a little bit of space and room to just do what they need to do, and we can help them by facilitating such a process with fellow, that made a very big difference, because then it gets personal, right? And I think especially if you want to tell these type of stories, you need to be personal and really let them feel the emotions that someone goes through.
Yeah. So creating these hyper personalized case studies.
Exactly, exactly.
Mm.
And the funny thing is, even though it's a B2B proposition, the business case itself gets, well, a little bit less harsh on you because you understand what someone goes through, and the emotional side just, it gets to people. So that's where they are convinced and step in, right? And say, yes, we're going to help these caregivers in our company.
Yeah. So, the other thing I wanted to chat with you about, Maarten, you're a little bit younger than me, just maybe, just maybe. I'm curious what you see are the generational differences as you're talking with more established innovators, folks who have been doing this a long time, versus a newer generation of innovation leaders. You and I were talking before the call about, it's been 12 years since Steve Jobs died. And for my generation, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Larry Ellison and Andy Grove, these were the names that we knew in Internet 1.0 that were really changing the world. And they had a very specific kind of style, I think, to how they decided to bring innovation into the world. What do you think is a generational shift in how let's say seasoned innovators look at the market versus how maybe your generation does? Specify yourself. Are you a Gen Zer? Are you a millennial? How do you think of yourself?
I think I'm more of a millennial, but I've never put thought to this actually. But I think I'm more of a millennial than a Gen Z.
Okay,
I'm from 1990, so I think it
got you.
even makes
You're a
sense to
millennial. Yeah.
exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. And I think I've got more of the traits of a millennial as well. And even because I was quite young when I started my first company, and I was very stubborn to just figure it out all on myself. So I think business-wise, I still have a very different look compared to everyone that went through all the corporate training levels. But what I see is that the innovators in Europe think differently in a very interesting way, because what I see is that they are even more rigid in the processes that they create and really following these processes to get to results. And one of the things that I see is that compared to the generation that is a little bit higher, in my opinion, value should be combined with a proper business model to deliver the value. And I think the accent was more on value than the balance between the two. And the people that I start talking to, which are more of my age, they start to see that it is very important to have that proper balance between value that you deliver and create and having the proper business model. And then when you start to like getting pushed by a board because hey, you've spent a lot of time on figuring out what the value is for the market. Now you need to do sales. Now just go out and sell it, sell it, sell it. That's what I see like the generation above me is doing, and maybe two generations above me. I'm not telling about the boomers, because what I see with the boomers is they are still also learning that like innovation is also still like a very big learning processes, and with the learnings you can still get results, but they're even more pushing on sales. And what I think is that our generation, what I mentioned in the beginning, they are even looking more into the processes and the details of these processes to get constant results. And thus, it's easier to create, if you really understand that, it's going to be easier to create the compounding effect that everyone is looking for, but then stick to this rigid processes. And I think there's an interesting difference, which is you can't see that just, on the surface, but if you start really working with these people, you start to see how they do that. And that the process is really key, and the details of that process.
Yeah. So what would your advice be to, junior to senior? What would you want to tell them?
I always try to translate what we are doing within the process to something that has already worked for the company, and then cast back, what were you doing back then? Makes sense if you look at what we're doing in this new innovation process. And why that has worked is because we are now figuring out that particular part of the process. So look at the stories that made the company big, then see, just have some interviews on what did you do back then, and then translate it into, okay, but this is what we are doing right now. And because there is now internet and there is this and that, and it's all very quick, that's why we have this sort of more granular processes. And that helps me a lot to explain it to senior management or boards, and be extremely concise in what you're trying to do, what the end result of that process should be.
Okay. Well, this has been fantastic because I love having a European perspective. I love a multi-generational perspective, and also just new ways of thinking about how we do this work. So it's time for me to put you on the hot seat now, Maarten. So tell me three questions. Number one, what is the greatest innovation of all time?
Wow. I think in the past 2 years, I really think that we just scratched the surface with AI. In the time that I actually adapted it and using it on a day-to-day basis is really, I still can't wrap my head around that. And I think it's gonna be, if you're talking about generations, I really think that this is the innovation that makes the difference for this full generation. I
Mm.
haven't said that about blockchain and all the other sort of, hype cycles that we had, but in this case, I still can't figure it out how this is gonna influence everything. If I look back in a longer time, I think for our generation it's the smartphone.
That's been the game changer, more so
I
than the
think it
internet.
is. I think so because yeah, I was like 5 or 6 years old when the internet was there, so I sort of grew into the internet and it was there. What really made the big change for me is then having your computer like basically in your pocket and doing everything with that.
Absolutely. So if you had the chance to join any innovation team in the
Mhm.
course of human history, which team would you have liked to have been on?
I don't know if this is going to be an innovation team, but I would have really loved to be part of the Constellation software group. And that is for a very interesting reason, because they are a company which is looking for very niched down software solutions. For example, software for dentists, or a software piece for plumbers, or like super niche down. And the way they have their processes in place and how they do that is, in my opinion, one of the best ways to capital allocation and innovation in sort of one process. And since I discovered that company, I'm literally reading everything that I could read from it because I think it's super fascinating what they're doing.
Hmm, fantastic. And then finally, what's something that really annoys you or something you wish existed in the world that doesn't exist today that you would love to see here? Yeah.
I would really love to have something that really does all the household tasks. I'm not a big fan of that. And yes, we're getting like the vacuum, the robotic vacuum cleaners, but if there would be something that really helps me to do all the household tasks, like everything. I don't know. I just like to spend my time more on reading and figuring out new stuff and innovation, right? Instead of doing these talks. And I don't think it's from this time anymore to just hire someone to actually do that, because I think it could be done with technology.
Yeah, the AI is going to solve a lot of problems, but it's not going to dust your
No, no, that's not going to
it's
do
not
it.
going to dust your tables and things around.
Exactly.
Yeah. How annoying, right? We haven't figured this out yet. Although I will say
Yeah.
I was doing a little internet searching last night just to see what are some of the weirdest, coolest things that are happening with AI and robotics at the moment, because I'm
Hmm.
interested when, we're going to have in-house robotics. And one of the most exclusive gyms on the East Coast is called Equinox, has now put into their locker rooms robotic massage tables where they have robots that give you a full body massage. It scans your whole body top to bottom. It determines where the pain and the pressure points are. And then you get to watch the robot arms go over your back
Wow.
and legs, and you can continue to adjust the pressure of the robot to your choosing while they're doing it. So for people who feel the ick by having somebody else's hands on them, they now have a robot that would give them a full body massage and no tipping required.
I would probably just use it every day if it was in my home.
Exactly.
Just
That's
even
exactly
though for 10 minutes, right? Just put it out here and then
10 minutes. I might forget about work altogether if I had a massage table in my house. What are you talking about?
I would probably after a few minutes, get bored and then I want to do something else. But yeah, even
Yeah.
though, that just a refresher, but every day, like 15 minutes, 10 minutes, perfect.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I'm putting on my Christmas list this year is
I can imagine.
is a robot massage table, or maybe I'll just have to buy a membership to this gym because it sounds spot on.
It
Well,
is.
Maarten, if people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way to do that?
I think the best way is to go on LinkedIn, and you could also read more of my thoughts because I'm trying to write 2 posts every week. I'm very active in responding on LinkedIn. So if you just go to LinkedIn and type in Maarten van Kroonenburg, you actually stated that name very, very properly. So congrats on that. Probably you will put it in the title or somewhere as well. That's the easiest way to find me.
Fantastic. Well, Maarten, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. And please keep in touch. We want to hear about maybe still some music coming out from you in the future too.
Yes, there's actually an album waiting. So you guessed that right.
Fantastic. Maarten, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for having me and see you next time.